All right, it's time to play with the commercial CSPM. At the start of our series on cloud security posture management, I mentioned that we would explore the three main options, all of which you will encounter at some point if your job touches cloud security. First was open source, and in our case, we use Prowler, which does also have a commercial version. Next is the Cloud Service Provider CSP native version of CSPM. Yeah, acronyms, I know. In our case, we use Security Hub, which is in a bit of a transition as I actually record this lab and we covered in that last lab. And then finally, commercial tooling. And we're going to cover that today using a product called Cloud Defense from a company called Firemon. Now, this barely scratches the surface because there are a lot of open source and commercial tools on the market. And heck, there's currently two versions of Security Hub. But by the time we're finished, you'll have a really good sense of understanding the different deployment options, capabilities, and user experiences, even as things change and you use different kinds of tools. Now, there's two major main learning objectives in this particular lab. The first is that I want you to see how to deploy a third-party tool into your cloud environment. So in this case, we're going to learn how to deploy a SaaS-based security tool that connects into our Amazon organization. And the deployment process we're going to use is kind of similar to what other tools would look like. The next is I'm giving you an understanding of real-time detection architecture. Now, this is similar to what we deployed in our S.L.A.W series, but it's more genericized and it's at a much bigger scale than what we did before. So to do this, let's get a bigger picture understanding of different CSPM capabilities as well. And then we're going to follow up with one more lab after this that's going to go into more details on using CSPM to detect and investigate specific misconfiguration and trace it back down to its root cause. Now, before we get into this, some disclaimers and some disclosures. Because I debated a fair bit on using commercial tools in any of these labs, or even any open source tools if it had too much of a commercial backing option like Prowler. But you're going to encounter these tools in the wild. And I can't teach you certain skills using only what AWS provides. And besides, in many cases, there might be a bias because if I only taught you using natively what's in AWS or Azure or Google, if I ever move on to those, and those tools aren't always the best. In some cases, it's going to be a better choice to use a third-party tool. Now, with that out of the way, some details about today. We're going to be using something called Firemon Cloud Defense, which is a commercial CSPM. And full disclosure, I founded the startup that was acquired by Firemon and became Cloud Defense. I worked there full time for a little while, and I still have an ownership stake. So if anyone ever, buys Firemon, I can stop paying for beer with stock certificates because VC and tech stuff is weird. But at this point in time, I don't have an active financial interest unless somebody buys the bigger company. Second is that Firemon already had a free tier, but they actually stood up a special isolated version for these labs, which is giving us a little bit more flexibility. It was kind of cool. It's a complex architecture and infrastructure as code. They literally just copied it and pushed it to a new environment, a new set of AWS accounts to support us for our Cloud S.L.A.W. Firemon also created a special Cloud S.L.A.W deployment process that automates nearly everything into a single CloudFormation stack that we will run from our management account. It's even going to auto-register you using your management account email address. Well, probably. I didn't test that feature yet. We're about to find out when I go to test that part live, but I did get everything else up and running already. Everything is going to be free for 60 days, then it's going to disable itself. You'll never be billed. They wouldn't know how to bill you anyway because they haven't collected any information about you. All they're going to have is the email address associated with your management account. And having our own little sandbox for these labs is pretty great. I want to personally thank Brandy Peterson, the CTO over there, for actually putting in the hours to build this for us, making it possible. Now, I said a big learning objective is to learn more about CSPMs, and one of those is learning about why CSPMs have an inventory and understanding the real-time approach. So think about everything you've learned in all of these labs around assessing configurations within the context of protecting against attackers. You've already seen multiple ways of scanning for misconfigurations. We did timed serverless scans that we built ourselves. We ran code in an instance using the open source version of Prowler. We even learned how to go around in the console and via the command line and manually check things. The problem with all of these is time, scale, and the overhead of actually looking for the misconfigurations. And that's before we get into problems like API service limits, which restricts the number of API calls you can make to AWS within a given time period. This is why every single major CSPM platform uses its own inventory. And I mentioned this in one of our earlier labs. So instead of making a lot of costly API calls to assess configurations, they actually have more flexibility to run these assessments on the same resources, but within their own inventory. And so how this works is the tools will sweep through the accounts and run the API calls to gather all the configuration information on what's running. They store that in their own database. Then they run the assessments against the database. They're not running the assessments live against your resources in the cloud account, which is what we've been doing so far. They keep that database updated over time as changes are made. Now, think through the problem though. If I want to run 20 different kinds of an assessments on a single instance, that could be a lot of repetitive API calls. And sometimes I want to know things like, is this instance in this particular security group? And those can be a pain to run on its own because you have to do all those individual API calls and then correlate that information. But if I have it all in my own database, those are pretty straightforward database queries, and or I can use my code. I don't have to make an API call for everything and be having a constant back and forth with that cloud provider. So it's much more efficient and it gives you a better picture without having to poke the cloud provider every single time. Now, the problem is you still need to collect all of that information and you need to keep it up to date. And different tools will handle this on their own schedules, ranging from every few minutes to every hour to I've seen some that are only checking once a day. They still need to make those describe API calls, those read API calls to get that updated information and keep their internal databases up to date. But a cool thing is that there are a few platforms out there, including the one we're going to use today, Cloud Defense. They'll update their inventory in real time, and I like the approach. I didn't code it, but I did actually work on the initial design for how this works. That was a big push personally to do real time. I love real time. And it's similar to what we've done previously when we implemented something like this in our real-time auto remediation lab, but now we're operating at a different scale. Here's how it works, and I want to go to the whiteboard for this part. So to start, we have an API call for making a change. And when that API call happens, that API call goes over to EventBridge. Let's see if I can make these straight lines instead of curved lines. There we go. Now it lines up a little better. And we're sending that EventBridge from our monitored account, our Amazon account, all the way over to the destination platform, which in this case, in our lab today, it's going to be Firemon Cloud Defense. Now, that's going to go to their EventBridge. It's EventBridge to EventBridge. Just like we did within our organization, you can actually do this between organizations. And the first thing that happens is on the CSPM side, on the Cloud Defense side, they are extracting the resource identifier and the resource type, and they do that with a Lambda function that triggers based on the event of a new event coming in. Then that goes to, depending on if it matches one of the covered things, it doesn't necessarily cover all kinds of resources, but most of them, that's going to go to the describe Lambda. Now, these are names that I'm making up. This is not exactly how the architecture works. We're focusing a little more conceptually. That describe Lambda then makes the API call to that resource to get the current configuration of the resource. So I don't know, let's make this a double-headed arrow because that means there's communications back and forth. So describe the resource responds. Then the describe Lambda takes that information and updates the inventory in the database itself. So now the database is updated. And I want to spend a moment going through this. You think about it. What happens is there's not like a time-based describe calls of describe everything in this account. Oops, it was on my eraser mode. Let me get it to the pencil mode. There we go. It's not describe everything in this account. It is something changes. That change is taken from EventBridge and sent to the provider. And only those change events, read events aren't moved over, just change events. That provider, that CSPM, is going, okay, I know what that resource is now. So let's get an update of that resource. And then we're going to update our inventory. And then once the inventory updates, that event of the inventory updating triggers all the assessments. And those assessments could be, I don't know, let's say 50 assessments. I don't know of any resource where we're looking for 50 assessments, but we are looking for some collection. And then sometimes, like for an instance, it could be something like 20. Now, here's what's cool about this. This is weirdly more efficient than running time scans because it's only pulling requested updated information. So it only is pulling things out as things change, which is much more efficient than running describe calls on everything in the account. Now, because things can slip through the cracks, any platform that does this also still needs to run a daily scan. There's some kinds of things that aren't going to create necessarily a CloudTrail event or the other kind of events. And you're going to see in the lab with Cloud Defense, it will run an initial scan. And then after that, it's still going to run a daily scan on a time basis to make sure nothing is slipping through those cracks. Now, go reread our labs because we already implemented simplified versions of everything that this platform is going to do today. I mean, I originally came up with the idea and I clearly need to milk it for all of its worth. Now, there's a second piece of this lab that I want to go over just really quickly because you'll see it as we go in there. There's another cool thing going on with the deployment that you're going to see, and it's worth explaining. Actually, it's two things. The first is that we only deploy a single CloudFormation stack. So not a stack set. We're only deploying a single stack into a single account. In our case, it's going to be our management account. That's how this is designed to work. But then it's going to deploy the tool into every one of our accounts throughout our organization. What's happening is that stack creates some resources at the top level, and then it creates a stack set that pushes all the required resources for all of the accounts, which is an IAM role and the EventBridge connections, into the rest of the organization. It is more complicated to build, but done well, it can be easier and more reliable than pushing stack sets out directly as we've done in most of our lab. The stack also auto-registers with the Cloud Defense platform and will automatically create your account there. That's what they built special for us to support these labs. So you don't need to go register or log into anything. It's actually, I mean, you'll log into it at the end after it gets registered, but so you can look at the results, but you don't have to create an account over there. This is all done using Lambda functions, and I really recommend you read the code in the template and take a look. For our labs, they did a few special things in there to pull the management account email and to auto-register, using that as the username to save us some steps. But this is really close to how the more mature commercial tools work in terms of actually auto-registering and communicating and really just trying to make your life easier as you're trying to integrate to these external platforms. There are common techniques used in more advanced infrastructure as code, and your developers might even actually be using these if you're working in an environment that uses a lot of infrastructure as code. You do with Terraform, you do with CloudFormation, whatever you're using. So read through the template and you probably will notice some of the other things we've learned around these labs, like using unique external IDs. Now, look, there is an inherent bias here because obviously I was involved with the creation of the platform, but I've taken a lot of those principles and a lot of things that I've learned building commercial platforms, even though that's not what I do anymore in my day-to-day job. And I've tried to bring them into our labs because we can use those to advance our own knowledge. So hopefully you find it interesting. Let's go ahead, let's set it up. Our goal today is we're going to set up the tool, we're going to get it configured, and we're just going to take a browse through the user interface. It's going to take some time for it to do its initial onboarding. And then the next lab, we'll go in more depth. I'll show you how to use it to investigate something. And really, again, I'm not trying to teach you the specifics of just using this tool. The principles will work with any of the major CSPM platforms. And so it'll, as you go out there and you use one of the other competing products on the market, you'll be able to have a better sense of how those work. And as I mentioned a few times, anywhere you go, if you're doing cloud security, you're going to be using a CSPM and you're probably going to be using a third-party CSPM. And so important set of skills to understand. All right, let's get into it. First thing we want to do is go into our management account, and that's where we're actually going to do everything today. Now, technically, we could have made it work for like our security operations account because that had permissions to run stack sets. But in my experience in doing the testing, it didn't run consistently there. It did work right away from the management account, and I wasn't going to go ask Fireman to make any more changes for us just for this. We'll go into CloudFormation, and you'll see that we've got our stacks here. Now I do want to move this to US West Oregon, and we'll keep it in US West 2 Oregon because that's where we tend to deploy everything. And you'll see here that we have within our management account just our regular security alerts that we did a while ago. We're going to go to Create Stack with New Resources. Choose an existing template, and the URL is in the blog post, or you can read it and copy it there and don't make any typos. Let me click Next. SPAC, making up words, stack details. Let's call it Cloud Defense. It's the name of this particular stack. Now, there is a piece you're going to need, which is your root organization ID. And I probably should have grabbed that first, but it's easy enough. I go to my down here, organizations, and we're going to open that up in a new tab. And within organizations, it's just this ID right here. So let me copy that, and I'll back out, and I'm going to paste that in. Now, the rest of this template, the parameters have all been tuned already for our labs. You don't change any of those down there. You could add regions, but again, we've locked out all of our regions, which just means you're going to actually get errors in Cloud Defense because it can't access the regions, and it's going to keep trying to access regions. But what this is going to do is this is the part that's going to send the real-time events. And so we're only tapping into the real-time events for those two regions because it would fail if we tried to deploy to any other regions anyway. So these are going to create an event bridge. There is a cost associated with this. It is a very small cost. It will be, close to unnoticeable. Configure stack options. I acknowledge that CloudFormation might create resources with custom names. Click Next. And you'll notice it didn't ask me for IAM permissions or anything else. I'll explain that in a moment. Click Submit. Now again, I didn't do anything with stack sets. So I just launched the stack, and you can see that there's these events going on here as it's starting to create things. But here's what's cool. So if I go back to the top level of CloudFormation, and you don't need to do this, I'm just going to do this to show you. And if I go into stack sets, then if we wait a little bit, it's already there. So these two stacks are created by Cloud Defense. So our top level, we basically have nested CloudFormation inside of CloudFormation, and that is commonly a more advanced technique for dealing with complex application deployments as opposed to the really simple ones that we've done. So everything is currently deploying. I'm going to go back to wherever you were. So go back, I hit a refresh on stacks. You can see it's also creating a stack in here from that stack set. Pretty cool the way that this is all working. I'll go back into where we were, and it's going to take a few minutes to run, so I'm going to go ahead and pause. That took maybe 5 minutes, probably a little less than that to run. And let me pull up. The next step is you need to go to email, and you'll see that it automatically registered. So let me go grab mine. And this is the email that came in. Now, no secret. You've seen this in the other labs. This is the email for my management account address that I set up. And so that CloudFormation template worked great, automatically pulled that. Now with other commercial tools, that's not how this is going to work. That piece we added for these labs just to make your life easier. The next thing is we need to go ahead and activate that account. And so you can either click on that button or that link. Let me pause it because I have to get it into the proper web browser to show you here. So let me go do that real quick. And here we are for Cloud Defense. All right, so let's go and create a password for this. I'm going to pause again because you know what? I'm not going to show you guys my password. It's bad enough you know my username. Went over to 1Password, generated my password. Now I'm going to agree to the license agreement and activate. And no reason to save that here because I have my other password manager. And then I'll click sign in because we had just entered the session. It actually keeps track of that. And so this is the full commercial CSPM. If you click on the side here, where's the arrow down here? This will actually show you the capabilities that are turned on. First is the posture managing, very similar to what we saw over in the Security Hub CSPM version with the various findings. This is just starting to fill in, and I'm going to show you why we don't have a whole lot yet. It just has some IAM stuff. But you can see it's pulling things down pretty much right away as soon as it's gotten provision. You can go in, it gives you the details of what it is. So why is this? So we don't have MFA on root. That's okay. We have our root account locked out. We're going to go into findings management in the next lab because that is something that's important when working with any CSPM, including Security Hub or the open source Prowler. You've got exemptions. You can actually pull the JSON of the resource. Now, this is pulling this out of the inventory system. So if you go over to inventory, you can actually see it's updating, and it tells you when this inventory was updated. Tells you the account and the region, what the resource is, and it tells you the reason or how that it was updated. So in some cases, this is done because these were API calls that triggered that automatic assessment. When you see blank here on inventory, that's because this was pulled in via a time-based scan. This is going to be different in whatever tools you're using, but within Cloud Defense, when you see these blanks, that means it's because it's a time-based initial scan. There wasn't a triggering event. But for the other ones, you can actually see the triggering event and who triggered the event. You can click on it, and it gives you all of the stuff from that CloudTrail API call, which is very cool. So you can see actually the current configuration of the role, but you can actually look at the changes. It's going to give you a history of changes. So that's when it was created. Any related events to the resource, we do have stuff there because this was all triggered by one CloudFormation kind of template. So this is everything that was kind of anything that had that stack set that created that. And so there's a lot of different ways to mix and match this. We're going to spend more time on that later. So again, inventory is being kept up to date with both changes as well as the time-based scan. This won't have everything in your accounts for a while. It's going to take a little bit of time to refresh, but it is running the active scan right now. Now, if 500 of you are running Cloud Defense at the same time, our little sandbox environments does have some limits on it because FireMud doesn't want to, they got to manage their cost as well. So it could take a little bit of time. But then you can actually have some fun and look at some of the other capabilities. So they were generous and turned everything on. You can actually see cloud security maturity model assessments and how that works. It gives you cool little graphs. Of course, there's nothing in here yet because it's still collecting that initial data. Compliance is pulling from various compliance reports, just some basic ones there that we have, and it's going to give you your compliance reporting, and you can actually output this. You can track your events. You can generate alerts. We'll get into all of that later. The main piece that we're going to be focusing on is on this CSPM part. Now, if you do want to set up alerts, you can set up alerts and create an alert to email you. And we don't have anything set up yet, so that's why you see that. But we're not going to do that as part of these labs officially because we already have a lot of stuff spamming our email. So that's it for the lab. Really quick and easy to set it up. You saw how all the CloudFormation connected in. If we looked at the template, you would see external IDs. You would see the Lambda functions that do the automatic registration. All of that, again, designed to reduce the amount of overhead for when we go to configure something. There are tools still out there, and in the early days, you had to manually configure in every individual environment, but this automated it. The closest version to this that we've done previously in some ways is by comparison with Prowler, we actually wrote a script that would actually scan all of our accounts. Now remember, that's different. That version of Prowler, commercial version, has an inventory, but the open source doesn't have an inventory. So I had to run all of its API calls in sequence. This time, we're still doing all those describe API calls once, but we're now putting that all into inventory. That's where those posture assessments, that's where those security checks are actually running. Now, in our next lab, we'll dig more into the details of we're going to create a misconfiguration, and we'll actually look how to track that and trace it back to the user, and we'll spin through a little bit more of the kind of major areas. But for CSPM, those posture findings, you're going to get compliance reports, you're going to get inventory, you're going to get some kind of alerts. That's going to be standard across all the products on the market, and then you might have more or less features. Some of them work in real time, some of them don't. And they all have different scanning intervals. And every one of the products, even if it's real time, is still going to be doing time-based scans. So play around with this, look at it. It's going to keep filling in. Again, it's not really costing you anything. So enjoy playing with it. We'll have it for 60 days. But that next lab is going to be out in hopefully 2 weeks. And you can feel free to deprovision your account after that. So hope you found this one interesting. I'm kind of excited with this one. I thought there was some cool stuff in here. And we'll get to play with it more coming up soon.